Greetings. You are listening to Guiding Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. I'm here today with Ari Moshe Wolfe, and we are discussing Chiron and Pisces, or Chiron in the 12th house. We have made it all the way around this zodiac. I love this image. I found this, and it made me think of the words innocence lost.
Isn't that you when you were 12, Kristin?
Must have been. I was not smoking at 12. I will tell you that. Or ever. I've never
Looks
smoked in
so
my
much
life.
like you, though.
It does. That is what I look like at 12. That is definitely the attitude I had. But I was pretty shy, and I was actually a little sweeter than this girl looks. And I certainly wasn't smoking. But innocence, not that there's anything wrong with it. It was just not something that I was doing at that age. It is definitely, there is something wrong with it for our health, I would say. But anyway, no judgment there. I was just loving this image because really Chiron and Pisces is all about that. There is something about the nature of Chiron and Pisces where the souls just do not see something coming, really. I think, it's the rose-colored glasses. There's this natural innocence that does exist in the Pisces archetype. And once certain things occur through this Chiron phenomena, it can be experienced as being jaded, feeling like, what's the point? And when the innocence is lost for a child who's been abused or what have you, there's just no way to erase those memories. And so in this case too, looking at this image, it just reminds me of a girl whose parents aren't involved in her life, and she's in with the wrong crowd perhaps, and the only way to survive is to be as she is in this photo, right? Just in a sense operate like a boy would in order to survive. So I do feel this image is fitting because with the Pisces archetype, they want to believe in the good and the God in others, and the spirit of a person or a situation's potential. And there's this crazy disillusionment that is coupled with that desire for such things. It's just like a lost dream in a sense. And so it's a difficult one. It always is when we're dealing with Pisces, or the queen of Pisces, I should say, 12th house.
Absolutely.
So how would you like to start this?
Anything 12th house related speaks to the disillusionment of consciousness relative to where it's placed meaning and value and truth in anything conditional. So the 12th house teaches us about what is not conditional, what can't be possessed, contained, or defined within time and space. It's a totality of consciousness itself. And that really is the basis for that sense of deep trust and indiscriminate openness to life. Like, all right, I trust life inherently, indiscriminately. And then there can be this experience of profound disillusionment. And that really points back to where there's an underlying expectation and misunderstanding of who we are and what reality is. So what we learn in the 12th house is this quality of active relationship to reality, not one where we're indiscriminately trusting, but learning how to actually become an instrument, become in alignment with the greater force, the greater truth of reality itself. And so the 12th house really speaks to the energy of meditation, prayer, anything that links the individual consciousness to the non-local, to the totality. And in that sense, the personal self is linking to something much greater, something that we can't control, but recognizing that we are one with it. So, when I think of the 12th house, I think of the teachings of Jesus and this one beautiful teaching that I just love thinking about, and that is, seek the kingdom of heaven first, and all else shall be provided for you. And what we do is we say, well, okay, I need to, figure out how I'm going to fulfill my worldly responsibilities. And I'll do that, focus on that, but I'll put love here. I'll put the totality, I put the truth over here, and then there's like everything else in my life. And so there can be this like never-ending yearning and desire to connect with this feeling of something more than this mundane. There can be this emptiness and this void, but we learn that everything comes from source. There's nothing that's separate from that. And when we link every aspect of our life to the source of everything, we learn that spirit is moving with us, that we are creating with spirit. Otherwise, there can be this sense of, okay, and I got into this relationship, or I got into this amazing job, I had this really great meditation experience, but these are all conditional things that can provide this sense of ultimate belonging. 12th house being the ultimate home, the ultimate landing pad of everything, because it's this present moment, it's the truth. So it's like this ultimate sense of coming home, where the truth of all things, that is the essence of all things, is experienced, is returned to. And there's nothing in creation that doesn't have this inherent impulse to return and to know this return. But we can link conditional circumstances to it. And that's where we can have like this child. There can be this innocence, and innocence is open, it's trusting, and that's disillusioned by way of life not being there for us, or really good relationship, and then suddenly this person is not who we expected them to be. So there can be a certain trauma in general with the 12th house of this innocence and this trust being disillusioned. And the point within all that is to orient towards, okay, what is love? Like, what actually is love? What actually is God, and how can I know it? How can I live in it as an expression of it? So it's orienting towards a fundamental truth that has nothing to do with the circumstances of our reality, because the circumstances of our reality are sort of a wild card. They might make us feel good. They might not make us feel good. But to know the truth of who we are, to know our oneness with the Creator, that's where the deep peace comes from. And so we can have the story of this child that, is deeply jaded and sort of dissociated, and there's like, total meaningless. But maybe earlier, this person is giving and giving and serving, but then realizes that, it doesn't matter how much you help people, they're still going to take advantage of you, things like that. And so these are the lessons that we learn in the 12th house. And we learn a certain neutrality that's linked to a deep peace that isn't uncaring, but it's not taking a false responsibility to save others or alleviate suffering. There's immense wisdom in the 12th house, and it's beyond any concepts that we try to place onto what the truth is or what it looks like. So when we put Chiron in the 12th house, we're looking at a core pattern of wounding and seeing oneself in wounded and broken in a core way that relates to the inaccessibility of truth, the inaccessibility of directly connecting with Creator. I am distant from love. I am not capable of being forgiven. I am not capable of experiencing a deep permeating peace. And so this can manifest in a soul in two ways. One, this deep permeating void, again, empty chasm that has no end to it, of feeling completely alone. And not alone in the sense of like, I'm alone, I wish I can play with someone, but alone in a more existential sense of being abandoned by Creator, or there being nothing to live for, no meaning in life. Like when consciousness begins to fall into a sense of meaninglessness, which is often just the replacement for an otherwise investment in meaningfulness, which isn't necessarily better, there can be this incredible depression, and there can be a lot of danger in that state, because there's really no meaning, no purpose for living. And so that existential void and chasm is just sort of a place that isolates oneself from all of life. And there can be a numbness and a sort of like, I don't feel anything. I don't feel pain. I don't feel pleasure. I don't feel compassion. I don't feel empathy. That's one expression. The other expression can be a soul that is impelled to martyr themselves, to serve others, and will be fueled on some level by this sense of guilt. That there's a sense of, I have to, give myself, otherwise I don't really deserve to live here. I don't deserve to exist as a separate being. So this relates to this like existential dilemma with one's own existence and this feeling of brokenness for existing. Like, I shouldn't be here. And so there can be this deep, harrowing isolation that's in that as well. And thus the soul constantly manifesting situations where they're helping other people, they're serving other people, but getting involved in things that are beyond their capacity. And that's a true thing with Chiron, right? Where we'll manifest situations that are masochistic that can either be beyond our capacity to deal with, thus sort of reflecting back to us our own inner sense of brokenness, or masochistic in a healthy sense in that, yes, there is going to be some pain involved, but that's okay. But there's a difference between the two. So the former example here being like taking on the ocean when you're just a small wave and realizing it's going to take you, it's going to consume you. And there can be a great disillusionment that occurs in that, by way of realizing that you can't run away from your brokenness. You can't run away from the wound, from the hurt, by distracting yourself with just giving and giving and giving and serving and focusing on others in that way. It's not actually going to bring you the peace that you really seek, that is at the core of your own being. But the healthy expression of masochism with Chiron in the 12th house or in Pisces is this sense of, by serving others, by giving myself to love, it'll bring up the very places in me where I feel separate. It'll bring up the very places in me where I want to hide, where I don't want to be in this world, where I want to avoid it, where I don't want to connect, where I don't want to love, where I don't want to live and realize my true nature as love. Because in so doing, in doing just that, it hurts. And that's to reopen our heart to the grief and the pain of our perceived separation. It's like the separation itself isn't a reality and it's not a thing to solve, but it's a thing to feel. The grief of it, the grief and the hurt that we create in being separate and cutting ourselves off from love. So there's something deeply beautiful that happens for a soul in just giving themselves to be an agent, and they become a spiritual Chiron agent of God. They often will manifest in this world to ultimately do work that will unify, but it's going to be done in a way that it's accessing places in the collective that are, people don't want to go, where love hasn't been seen. It'll make them face places within themselves where they otherwise said, I don't want to look at love here. I don't want to see the truth here. So that's the medicine of it. And there's an immense compassion for suffering. In many ways, Chiron in the 12th house is like the ultimate expression for that, savior, martyr, like that deep journey of going through turmoil and coming on the other end, energy of Chiron. It's just the best signature for that in all of the other houses and signs, because it's so full on. It's so full on. It's like you can give yourself up on the cross and do it all in love. And that idea of martyrdom and sacrifice, we'll look at Pope Francis. He was I was watching a video of him earlier. He has Chiron in the 12th in Gemini. And he was talking about how, every generation has martyrs, and to be a Christian means you martyr. And while there's definitely probably some elements of patriarchal, masochistic Christianity thought in that, I can also feel the sweetness in it, because there's a quality of giving up your own delusions, giving up your own ideas, not being afraid of suffering, not being afraid of pain for a higher reason, for a higher cause. Like that principle of not being afraid, not resisting difficulty, all for the sake of love. There is immense healing and nobility in that. And that's Chiron in the 12th house.
I just thought of something really perfectly profound for what you just shared, because I just remembered that Jeffrey Green, our teacher of EA, has Chiron in the 12th.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Scorpio. Well, one of
I
the
was
things
wondering
that
if you would share this. Yeah.
one of the things that he said more than once in school way back when was, how many people in this room would be willing to die for what they believe in? I mean, if that's not like a question for a martyr from a martyr, you know, that Jesus kind of archetype, the Pisces archetype, and of course Jesus did have a stellium of planets in Pisces. Then I don't know what is. But everybody in the room raised their hand, including me. But he stopped us and said, you know, it's easy to say that now, but you know, when you're really facing, you know, staring death in the eyes or judgments of others,
Mm,
not a lot of people are going to have the courage to stick to their fingerprint, to their truth.
mm,
Very few people will not conform in order to survive.
mhm,
And so the purest of the pure of this Pisces archetype will never conform. And the Jesus types, and I would go so far as to say Jeffrey never conformed, or he claims he never conformed, and I believe him. He never conformed in the way that I saw him in the world.
no, he definitely never conformed.
Never. And he never, and you know, on the one hand, boy, you know, that can allow the soul to evolve with ripping speed. But on the other hand,
Yeah.
the consequences of that are just brutal. And so there is this experience of being victimized and absolute disillusionment when other people say they're going to die for what they believe in and don't, or say they mean something but do something else. Because the Pisces archetype wants to believe in what you're saying. They want to believe you when you tell them that you love them, that you will never betray them. They want to believe that with every fiber of their being. And every time the Pisces archetype gets hurt, every time it feels like the very first time.
Mm,
Every time. Doesn't matter how many times you get burned. Just like on the flip side, the very beautiful thing about Pisces, a first kiss, for example. Every time you have a first kiss, it will feel like the very first time you had that first kiss. It is a blessing and a curse to carry a lot of 12th house or Pisces energy, because you feel everything. There is nothing you do not feel. You have the most open aura, open energy field. You take in all the good and the glory, and you take all the darkness and the shadow. You take it all in one fell swoop. And so there's a price that someone pays with that.
beautiful.
My
And
one last thing I just
yeah,
want to say,
yeah.
at one point in everybody's evolution, you will come to a place where you can say that I will die for what I believe in and mean it.
Mm,
Everybody will reach that Pisces place. Everybody will reach the 11th hour. Everybody will reach that point in time when they realize that nothing else matters. And the other thing we think about when we look at Pisces is we consider the sea or this as the source of all things, right? As this body of water. And every wave that separates from that sea is a soul being born. The
mm,
wave feels separate, but it's still connected. And this is what you were saying earlier, Ari. This is what you're wanting to remind people of about love, right? Where's the love? The love is always within you. That eternal pulse is always part of you. We feel separate, but we're not. And just like when the wave is finishing its tour and it wants to dissolve back into the sea, that wholeness is recovered, or that holiness. most of us don't know that experience until we literally leave our body.
Mm, that's it. As much as our consciousness is focused on satisfaction through this physical reality as the be all end all, is where we'll need to defend it and hold on to it and kind of affirm it constantly as the be all end all. And so I love what you're saying in the sense of when we trust in the ultimate value and meaning of truth, of love, then cleaving to that in the midst of all difficulties, in the midst of all challenges, will have that feeling of whatever I need to lose, whatever I need to let go of, whatever needs to move through me. I mean, Jeff, you gave the example of Scorpio, and we'll look at this chart in a moment, a very good example of this, of a Scorpio Chiron in the 12th house. But that's such a great example, especially if, look at his life and stories he's told of his life and his past as well, of this genuine sense of loss and sacrifice and martyrdom. And I would just put the disclaimer that, dying for what you believe in also should not become a stance of possessiveness, because that can become its own karma of, a pride and righteousness.
Right, for
And
sure.
so dying for the truth is really a matter of a total softening and a total devotion and trust. And I think we all experience that in our lives in small ways, where we choose to open up and let go of whatever we're holding on to so we can love in this moment, whatever might be taken or whatever the consequences might be. We all practice that in our own lives in small ways often. So one other thing about Chiron is, in relation to where our soul might have this guilt and the pattern of creating wounding for others, is where a soul can cultivate this psychology or this mentality of victimization, feeling like life is much greater than them and that they're so small and they're always being taken advantage of. And so it's like they'll compensate for that by putting on the persona, putting on the story, on the identity of being broken, being wounded, being taken advantage of, being helpless. And in that sense, not taking responsibility for their own work, for their own creation, for what they brought upon themselves. We can see this very often with Chiron in the 12th house. There being this like deeply vulnerable sense of, I'm not protected in life. I'm, going to be hurt. I'm going to be taken advantage of. And oftentimes within that is an unprocessed pattern of living in a way where the soul will be attaching meaning and value onto anything that basically allows them to keep from this deep sense of, I don't know who I am and I don't know where I am and I don't feel safe. And this can actually cause a lot of pain for other people because it can create this almost sadistic mentality where everything outside of oneself is the cause for why I'm having difficulties in life. And so that can be a karmic dynamic with Chiron in the 12th house, where then a soul, if they're conscious, might be faced with a lifetime where they're going to have this real deep feeling of, I don't want to cause difficulties for anyone, right? Because it can be as like a consequence of this guilt of having blamed everything on stuff outside of oneself, blamed all of one's problems externally. So anything else you want to add on Chiron before we look at some charts?
Yeah, I do. When we think of being on the front lines of something, we often think of Aries, right? The warrior. But it's the combination of Pisces and Aries. And I definitely would say Capricorn at times. When the Pisces soul will sacrifice themselves for something greater. So there is that front line feeling hence the words or the question, how many of you would die for what you believe in? That soul would go to the front line. They would take the arrow. And by taking the arrow, you get the wound, you get the death, you get the hit, you take the hit, essentially. So I just wanted to share that as well.
And also just remember that Chiron often is the archer with one arm, right? It's this archetype where we don't feel connected, right? So there can be the simultaneous like victim mentality, or like life is always doing bad things to me, or I feel really vulnerable. At the same time, being called to a life of service, being called to be actually doing work that literally supports and helps other people to be forgiven, to be loved. And this person can even be performing miracles, right? Like around them, miracles happen and healings happen, but they themselves are sick. It's very common dynamic with Chiron in the 12th or Pisces, because the medicine itself is really born from that meeting point of their own deep vulnerability, if they can meet that. And it's like being able to do all these amazing works and still feeling broken. That's where the medicine is. That's where the sweetness is with a signature, if one can be really honest with themselves.
Exactly. Okay. All right, I'm ready for charts.
Hillary Clinton.
Whoa.
This is going to be controversial. Okay, so take another sip of my seltzer. Let's just look at the obvious here. Chiron with Venus and the Sun and Mercury in the 12th house, also the ruler of this, also the South Node in Scorpio. Chiron's ruled by and squaring Pluto with Saturn and Mars. So obviously we have a soul dynamic that's dealing with power and truth and being a leader and standing for something they believe in. I mean, that question, like, will you die for what you believe in, is like very relevant for this soul in particular. But we also have the example of the shadow side of Chiron. So I'm going to give two examples here. If we remember during the presidential debates, there's this like one horrible scene where Trump is behind her.
Oh yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So it's like that, you know, big shadowy dark energy following her around, trying to intimidate her. And I think she talked about it in an interview. I don't know. I don't recall if this is what she said, but it's like she felt like the hairs on the back of her neck. It's like evil breathing down her throat.
Totally.
You know, and
I mean, honestly, you don't have to love Hillary to get the willies by that whole scene, especially if you're a woman. Like, just imagine any man doing that to you. Oh, I mean, well, yeah.
Absolutely. And that sense of I'm gonna stand in my truth. Meanwhile, there's this 12th house Scorpio evil energy that I can't control, that's, you know, attacking me. You know, there's no doubt about it. Donald Trump enacted the full array of psychic attacks on her. He's a dark magician. So this was a big part of it. And so the wounding in self-worth, Venus, Chiron, the wounding in my own power, my own nobility, Leo, right? And the truth, and then her being called a liar and all these things that people are saying about her, all of that really deeply impacting upon the sense of I'm constantly being blocked from having power. And that's one of the shadow pieces that I would say exists for this soul, where there's been this very strong narcissistic investment in power, in being believed and being right, to the point where she has lied and done things that are unethical, dishonest, all to put herself on the top. And so those are two sides of the coin. So we have that again, where even to today, she talks about the election and blames Bernie Sanders for the fact that she lost. And she lies straight out, saying that he invented policies that were just more liberal than her to one-up her. And of course, he's been consistent with his policies for 40 years, whatever. But this happened during the debates as well, where she will claim that she believed or said certain things that she never said, and turn it around to make it seem like that Bernie, was manipulating her. And this is an example where she has lied to gain power and make herself thus seem victimized by someone else who was actually acting in innocence. So her Chiron reflects at the core a deep sense of feeling blocked and limited by forces beyond her control. And I would say a part of her own soul healing, and what I perceive when I listen to her and feel into her, part of her own soul trajectory is becoming self-honest, taking responsibility for her own energy. Am I being honest? Am I being sincere? Am I being ethical and truthful in what I'm speaking and what I'm saying? And in that sense, there's that learning of what's given to me and what's taken from me, I can't control. That's beyond me. That's forces beyond what I can do. But I can center myself in my own power and live in my truth and not need to manipulate to be in that power. And thus, if it comes and if it goes, if I'm recognized, if I win or if I lose, it's okay because I'm in integrity with my truth. I don't have to fight and manipulate and make things up in order to win, in order to be powerful. So that lesson of overcoming victimization really means connecting with that deep sense of, Chiron conjunct the sun and Venus in the 12th house, and especially with that Saturn dynamic in there, absolutely being a woman doing this work, running for a presidency, there is immense vulnerability. And obviously in her soul trajectory, there's an immense pattern of having been persecuted for being powerful and being blocked from accessing that power. And so for her to connect with that vulnerability and to integrate that, where it's an invitation to become intimate with that very place where she feels blocked, and to find power in that, to find truthfulness in that, to find more of her own authentic self in that, instead of operating under the identity and the illusion of victim. And I just, the recent talks that I've heard where she is just blaming Tulsi Gabbard, Bernie Sanders, all that kind of stuff. People that are sincerely trying to do good, acting from their own ethics, doing what they believe is right, not trying to hurt her. So that's a little perspective on that. Meanwhile, the whole collective dynamic, this whole experience, of course, relates to a whole collective theme in the persecution of the feminine. And she has a Pisces moon trining her south node as well. So there's an underlying sense of vulnerability here, being unprotected. So that must be incredibly vulnerable for this soul. And it requires so much courage for her to be walking the path that she walked, to be seeking to achieve and, follow her truth, regardless of all the disempowerment and persecution. Notwithstanding the soul lesson in my perception of her being honest, learning how to be really honest and taking responsibility for herself. Anything you want to add, Kristin?
I think you just nailed it all. I loved how you shared her experience with this Chiron placement. This is a perfect example of, it's in the 12th house, but it's in Scorpio. And you think to the platform, the stage that she arrived at, all that 12th house, right? There's this energy of fame or being well known all around the world. You even see the Pluto Mars balsamic in Leo.
He craves that.
Just to be completely kind of duped by the world at large, because all this underhanded stuff too, all the stuff that happened with the stupid emails and everything else. She literally had the rug pulled out from beneath her feet before the wind. She was one step before the finish line.
Yep.
Imagine what this country would be. I realize you don't have to love her, but anybody would be better than what we've got by a mile.
Absolutely.
And so, talk about being royally just completely blindsided. Yeah, blindsided. Neptune in the 11th. Whew. Okay. Thank you for that one. We can move on though.
Tina. We love Tina. We've talked about Tina before with, Pluto in the 12th house and all that, but she has Chiron and Cancer in the 12th. And I just want to offer this one perspective from her own, biography. And the Cancer in the 12th house relates to that wounding around, where am I? Where's my home? Where's my belonging? And she talks about, creating a life with Ted and raising his children. There's always this feeling of other, like it's not my life. He's even raised his children. And that sense of having just kind of gone with the flow, following the lead of someone else, but not having a sense of place and not having a sense of belonging within her own being. And so that underlying feeling and that wound of, I feel out of place, and that Chiron squares the nodes. South node in Aries in the 9th house. The whole piece here was that Libra 3rd house, following. I'm going to follow you around. Where you go, that's my home. That's where I am. Identity placed in a condition of home, in a condition of peace and beingness that is outside of herself. And that Aries South node here represents this lesson of, stand in your truth. With Saturn there, reclaim your own authority, live your life. And Cancer in the 12th house, your home, your sense of self will be shown to you. When you stop trying to put it in something that creates a false sense of security and belonging and love, which in this case would be another person, you follow your path, and the 12th house is Creator shows it to you. You don't have to make it up. You don't have to hold on to something that isn't authentic for that reason. And so her following her own path, Aries 9th house, walking out, going alone, doing it herself, following her own truth. Cancer in the 12th, she became a symbol of female empowerment and also care, and a symbol of all things love and good and healthy. And of course, Pluto and Leo in the 12th, symbolizing this, also square in the nodes, this collective symbol of power and empowerment. So another piece here is, Chiron is ruled by the moon in Gemini in the 10th house. So this soul, some years ago, left the United States to move to Switzerland and, let go of her citizenship to live in a completely different country, 10th house. And there's a lot more peace. There's a sense of retreat from the world. She's a Buddhist. She's in a spiritual stage of evolution. And this just reflects this ongoing journey of this soul embracing her own path, her own uniqueness, her own self-direction, regardless of what other people want from her, so that her home, her identity is rooted in the formless, in the timeless. And I was watching an interview recently from this past year where she was asked, is there anything that you want? And she thought about it and she said, no, I have everything that I need. And how many people can really say that and really mean it, right? There's something really powerful in that. So her journey in self-intimacy and self-love, in being nurtured in spirit via trusting her own self-direction. That's Chiron in the 12th house in Cancer. Anything you might want to add to that?
Just that when I think of Pisces, I think of, as you shared, just sort of this seamless, boundless, timeless kind of way within oneself. And with that, all that Pisces 12th house energy combined with the fire, there was just this wild abandon about her, like everything was, is that the right way you say that? Where, yeah, it's just this wild abandon. I loved it. It's just all this, like the way she danced, the way she swung her hair around. It was so Sagittarian, wasn't it?
So Sagittarius.
But I love that, she just didn't hold anything back. And I just love the fire mixed with that Pisces, because when I see fire and Pisces, it is somebody who's just putting themselves out there, for the world to see, and not going to apologize for it. Come on board, everybody, like follow me. Follow me, not from the standpoint of I've got all the answers, but follow me. I know how to help you feel good, right? Being like one with the music and all of that. And the
Mm-hmm.
follow me is a South Node and Saturn in Aries, of course. Saturn on the South Node in Aries. You know, she's a natural leader through her sensitivity and innocence in a way. Follow the feeling and follow the love for sure. That
Yeah.
is who she is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pope Francis. So I have a little quote here. This was like an interview about sexual abuse of nuns. There have been priests and bishops who have done this, and I think it's still taking place because it's not as though the moment you become aware of something, it goes away. I love that quote. And to me, that really just expresses his honesty, his sincerity, and the willingness to say things that others aren't saying. And there's a natural openness to his mind where he has been inclusive of different ways of thinking, different perspectives that have otherwise been denied in the church. And that openness, that mutability of the mind is basically this ability to hold love, 12th house, in a way where the mind isn't fixing this logical parameter around what it is and what it has to look like. So there's sort of a spaciousness within the soul to think in more open ways, to see pathways, because it hasn't been closed. It hasn't been rigidly fixed on an idea of what things are. And so this Chiron in Gemini in the 12th house, on one level, would be this yearning to dissolve his mind, to become a messenger of God, to be an agent, and that his words can speak and touch the masses. And his words, Gemini, also bring healing and validation to a lot of people that have been hurt and wounded by the church, by spirituality. And there would also be within the soul, with Chiron on the South Node retrograde, and it's say, okay, it's squaring Neptune in the second house in Virgo. Both are ruled by Mercury in Capricorn on the DC, on the descendant. And that itself is ruled by Pisces in the 8th house, Saturn, which also squares the nodes. So to me, this also speaks highly about the loss of innocence that his soul is reconciling with. The loss of innocence relative to duplicit authority figures. There's something very interesting about him being in a position of authority now. And that Uranus and Mercury is trining Uranus up there in the 10th house, embodying this authority for the church, a very traditional structure, but in his own way, in a way that sort of brings a little bit more of an individuation quality to it, because his soul is sort of beyond consensus, or definitely moving beyond consensus. That with the square from Saturn and Pisces and Neptune in the second house, both sexual signatures relating to the use of energy, the use of sexual energy and other people's resources, he refused to sleep in the main majestic, room that they have for the Pope. He sleeps in the guest quarters, humble. He doesn't want to take what is not his and take advantage of other people's resources. There's a deep sensitivity and humility to that. And I would say just that this is a part of his own healing, and really, let me find the right words for this. Humbling himself so that his consciousness reaches the lowest common denominator, that he rises to power from the emptiness of his own being, of being love, not taking for his own self, Neptune and Virgo in the second, but letting what he has be in service to everything. And I see that as a natural trajectory of his own soul. And the wounding here with Chiron conjunct the South Node in Gemini in the 12th, with that Mercury ruling it in the squares of Saturn, to me really does speak to the duplicity within the church, and the way text and language and spiritual knowledge can be used to further the corruption of other people for their own means, and that this is something that this soul is deeply sensitive to and wanting to heal. Anything you want to add to that?
Oh, that was excellent. I think, the quote really just too reflects how anybody with this kind of awareness or understanding, consciousness, how they hold the wounds of others, right? How they hold a space of compassion, how he holds a space of compassion for those people. It's like a phrase I've used before. Once you walk through a door, you can't unwalk through it.
Mm-hmm.
Once you see something, you can't pretend it didn't happen. Once you heard the truth of anything, you can't, change what is. And so there really is a need to kind of to bathe in what is, to really take it in and understand it. And obviously you can't fix it, you can't change it, but his role, of course, is to hold the space of compassion and hopefully help to change things moving forward. So yeah. And with Chiron and Gemini retrograde in the 12th, I mean, his voice, right, it's a universal voice to reach those who have been wounded.
Mm-hmm.
Is a messenger. So yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you for that.
Let's look at your chart. So we talked about this a little bit in the 9th house, but do you want to share anything about you and your journey with Chiron?
I feel like we just talked about me last time.
I know, right?
No
pressure.
Well, all I will add or remind people of is that Chiron and Pisces in the 9th house can be wounds around spiritual paths and beliefs. And you talked early on in this show about the nature of hiding with Pisces. And so Chiron and Pisces can be a soul who has been hiding from who they are for some reason. And I was hiding through who I was by being born into a very religious, traditional family. Religion is a 9th house archetype if it's conditioned. And that Chiron and Pisces, is just hiding behind that facade. And the 9th house has to do with, really the sphere of being who I naturally am in the world because of the sphere of being judged for it. You can see that Chiron is conjunct Saturn and they are both opposing Pluto and Uranus. Mm-hmm. So the hiding can come from, how many people for countless lifetimes, thousands of years have, thrown their hands up and said it's not worth it, because every time I try to follow a natural path, there's some severe consequence for it. At some point, the soul surrenders. But inevitably, we're going to have to make our way back to who we are. We can't just hit the delete button. We were given a certain sort of fingerprint, nature designed by God, and we can't change it. We can only evolve it and find the courage to become it again. So the Pisces can connect to a healing that is necessary, a healing of those wounds, and to trust that by honoring who we are, we can become whole again. Or I like to say holy.
Holy.
Because we become one with the sea.
I love that. See.
That's all. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, and just, to say, knowing you, that your essence, your being is to embody unconditional love and acceptance of people from all walks of life, all paths, no matter who you are. There's a sense of people can come home with you.
Oh,
And that I feel the Chiron in it, because there's a quality of universal Chiron and Pisces in the ninth, the universal compassion for all different people, all different ways, and that reflection of people walking their own truth. And I also see how intimate that is to your own experience of hiding for so many lifetimes and learning to come out with who you are and knowing your direct connection with source in your own natural way. So it's like I just feel that Chiron essence in the sense of how the service manifests simultaneous to the tenderness of your own journey, if I might say so.
well, thank you, Ari. I feel like the compassion comes from feeling as if you've been there, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
when you've been there and someone comes to you with pain because they can't be who they are, even if it's 180 degrees from where I'm standing, all you can have is compassion for that experience. We're all emotional beings. We all just want to be loved for who we are. Every soul wants that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how Aquarian you are.
That's it.
Some people don't need that necessarily, right? Maybe we don't need it to be okay, but we all want it. It's a natural desire to have someone validate your uniqueness. We're a kaleidoscope of color, and together we make the whole. Nobody's better than the other guy. We just all have a unique way with who we are, and it's our job to express that without filters, without resistance, without limitation. I mean, that would be the ultimate, in a perfect world that we could all do that.
Yeah.
But the world is not perfect, Pisces.
Right. And that, in that sense of wanting to just be loved, that reflects this deep knowing inside of all of us that this moment is okay. That everything that arises is accepted, because that's what the Tao does. Like everything is accepted here. Everything's allowed here. It's such a deep and permeating truth that we're wanting to know that. We're wanting to know that it's okay. Yeah, we separate ourselves from it. We say, this isn't allowed. This isn't okay. This doesn't belong. And so then we're looking for that permission for it to be okay, for it to belong. But I think that's one of the deepest teachings of spirit, is that everything is held within. Everything is given the space to be what it is, regardless, even evil, which is profound.
I wanted to, yeah, that's for sure. It feels very lopsided at the moment here. I wanted to share something with just, I think it's a good thought to close with, linked with the archetype of Pisces, because I had a client come to me with a lot of Pisces in her chart as well, Chiron and Pisces. And when I was speaking earlier about every time feels like the first time, what becomes so painful for Chiron and Pisces souls, or Chiron in the 12th house, is that when certain things happen to these souls, what becomes so painful is that in a million years they could never imagine doing what has been done to them to someone else.
Right.
That's where the disillusionment comes from. So this client was sharing with me about this painful relationship experience with a friend, and sharing different things that were said and experiences she had, and she was crippled with pain by what happened. And the truth of the matter is that these two souls have totally different needs in relationships. Pisces people are wide open. They want to just completely be all in the experience. And when they try and have relationships with people that are more detached or distracted or maybe self-focused, it's going to be a disaster. And so it really comes down to, when that wounding happens, that the soul just can't get over how something's been done, because again, they in their own soul could never imagine doing the same thing to another.
Mm.
That is the rub right there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to understand it. And so when you can't understand something,
Mm-hmm.
that's when people get suicidal, or whatever. When it's really extreme, they can't wrap their head around it. They can't wrap their soul around it.
Mm.
It just
There's something so powerful in that. I want to share one thought on this, which is, and I've seen this so many times, that the state of confusion of not like, how can a person do this? That is often just a superficial level of not really embracing with trust and a certain level of willingness to look at oneself, because it can keep a person at this place of operating here, right? Like, I was innocent and I was trusting, and I don't understand how a person can do this. It's like not allowing themselves to grow beyond their innocence. Whereas reality is saying this happened, and reality is saying it hurts. You're feeling these things. And there's something really powerful. And I think this is where forgiveness really blossoms. In a person giving themselves permission to feel and to let it all move through them. It's like the not understanding, the feeling hurt, the anger, right? The resentment, like emotions that they might feel that they're like totally shocked by. There's a tendency to want to stay in the innocence, which then results in everything sort of being like, I'm innocent. Why is this happening? But to actually feel it brings up all these feelings that are not innocent. Like, oh, I'm really angry. I want to kill this person. I want this person to be hurt. I want them to know what it feels like. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
And a soul can have the realization that there's no difference. They can realize that everything's inside of them as well. And very, very often, this is not always the case. I don't want it to be taken or misunderstood. Very, very often, there are places within ourselves, maybe from past lives, that we don't remember, where we have violated innocence. And we may not be aware of this inside of ourselves, but it'll manifest on the outside. And the path of forgiveness, in a way, is really coming to know it on the inside, really coming to terms with it. Because I see this all the time. It's like this deep anger and resentment and frustration, but it's like to move beyond that is to actually say, this is here. And what does Pisces do? It surrenders to this, like this too. The perfection, if Pisces isn't like a perfect state, the perfection is this moment, which isn't perfect. But that's where the trusting of it is, the trusting of what I'm feeling right now. It takes really the willingness to let go of this dream reality of innocence and perfection. And then there's the realization of, oh, I was never really loving. That wasn't love. If it was love, then why am I wanting to kill this person? So that realization of, I don't know who they are. I don't even know who I am, right? Like this whole world opens up to truth if a soul is willing to take these experiences and actually look at themselves.
That's a perfect point, because the thing about Pisces, they can so easily forgive over and over and over, and then they're still left with this same experience that
Not,
continues to
yeah,
repeat.
it's not real
Really?
forgiveness.
I'm here again. And this is exactly what you said, and what I had shared with my client. It's like, okay, so this has been going on for 20 years. So for 14 of those years, you weren't dealing with it or allowing yourself to deal with it, being in denial about it. For the last 6 years, you've been confronting it and forgiving and forgiving and forgiving, and you're still wondering why it's happening, right? So what is it that you do need to see in yourself? Like, you have to remove attachment to outcomes, to understand that you are totally two different people, I think the Pisces, like you said, the dream, they dream or they imagine they have this, they believe in the spirit of the potential of the other person. And if that other person cannot rise to that occasion, and few people can when they're put up on a higher pedestal, then they continue to have this experience of disillusionment, which is, of course, all what they are calling in for themselves to evolve.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeffrey used to call himself the emotional chump, because he would just be, if someone appeared sincere and wanted to, get back into his life, then he would forgive them. But they just keep doing it again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, all Pisces within our charts, all the areas within our chart that have that Pisces influence. We do need to look at ourselves clearly, not just other people clearly, but ourselves as well. And
Yeah.
be more discerning with our choices and who we invest our heart into.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Well, that was an awesome show. Oh, Ari, I'm going to miss you.
Great. Well, I'm gonna have a baby,
Oh,
and when I have more time, we'll do another show.
I would love that. We'll do a show on baby birth charts.
Oh my God. I mean, just working with midwives and doula, and just like meeting all these people that I'm meeting right now. And I even like have this one doula astrologer friend who's creating this service called Embody Your Birth, where she's reading charts of babies. And what's really cool is like your birth story is your chart. It's like
Right.
I have so many thoughts about birth. It's like the soul is intentional about when they come in. And yet here we are as parents, planning, and it feels like we're in control, but like everything is providence. It's so hard to imagine that. It's just like
I know, it's awesome.
blows me away.
Oh,
So
all right. Well, we'll be praying for a peaceful entrance, and we look forward to getting together again. Thank you so much for this journey in 2019,
yeah.
Chiron through the houses and signs. And
As Chiron is stationing direct right now. Perfect timing.
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, all the best to you and to the mama.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.